Jaybird here for Jaybird Bakes Stuff. No, I'm just kidding. I just had to name it something. Anyway, this is a video for my friends and family whom which I've sent my sourdough starter to. I've sent it all over the United States, and with it obviously came an email with the history of Old Stinky, which is what we've so eloquently named him, and how I maintain that sourdough starter. But I had lots of friends and family request just a short video on how I actually maintain my sourdough starter. So getting into it, there's two ways that I think that you should maintain, or you can maintain, your sourdough starter. One is by using whole wheat flour, the other is by using white flour. I am lucky enough to live in a town where we have our very own flour mill, so I use Moore's Flour Mill. It's the freshest flour that I can personally get. If you don't have that luxury of living in a town that has its own flour mill, just try and find the best flour that you can. You really want to start with really good quality flour. You can't make high quality bread with inferior products. You just really want to start with good stuff. So wheat will make your sourdough more sour. White, unbleached flour is going to be easier for the sourdough to consume, therefore it's going to be more active, but slightly less sour. I actually use both. If I'm going to be doing long-term storage, I will be using half of the wheat flour with half of the bread flour, and I keep it more on the dry side. Keeping your starter more on the dry side is going to also start making it more sour. So dry and wheat, more sour. Loose, which is more water, more liquid, and white, less sour. So the other thing I want to point out too is long-term storage for me means I am going to be putting my sourdough starter away for 1 to 2 months. And with that, I'm going to be feeding it more wheat flour and keeping it more dry. But one of the things that I really want you to look at is, see this liquid that's sitting on top. This has actually been in long-term storage now in my refrigerator for about 2 months. And when you're going to take your starter out of the refrigerator and it has this blackish kind of liquid on it, you want to make sure that you don't dump that out. That is going to be the really good, really sour stuff that actually has made your sourdough starter sour. So what you'll want to do is go ahead and open this up and just stir that in, okay? And I don't keep a lot of sourdough when I put it, or sourdough starter when I put it away for long-term storage. I just keep enough to get me started again. And what I will do is, before you start making bread, when you take your sourdough starter out of long-term storage, is you really want to make sure you're giving it at least 3 feedings. And I will try and feed my sourdough starter about 20 to 24 hours in between feedings. And I really don't want to use a lot because I don't want to throw away a lot of flour. Flour's not really expensive, but it's very wasteful. And so what I'm going to be doing is, I'll take a look at what my recipe calls for. Let's just say that our recipe calls for 300 grams of sourdough starter. Well, I don't want to have 1,000 grams of sourdough starter and throw away a bunch. So what I will do is, when I pull my sourdough starter out of long-term storage, at least for the first time when I'm making bread, I'll keep that in mind, that I'm shooting for 300 plus about another 300 so I can put some back into long-term storage, okay? And I only want to keep, a couple hundred, 200 or 300 grams of sourdough starter for long-term storage to start again. And so what I'm going to do is, I just do 50 grams of sourdough starter, 50 grams of water, and 50 grams of flour. And the flour that I'm going to be using when I take it out of long-term storage is just regular, unbleached white flour. It's the easiest for the sourdough starter to consume, and it's going to be the most active, okay? And so I'm going to zero out my scale. I generally do this in a bowl because it's easy to work with, okay? So, and then I'm going to do 50 grams of sourdough starter, 50 grams of Old Stinky, and then I'm going to do 50 grams, I'm going to zero this out, and I'm going to do 50 grams of water. Okay, I'm just going to mix this together really good. Now this, what's left over that you just took out of long-term storage, is really what I would consider discard. And so it would be used either in pancakes or sourdough pizza. Most of the time I just throw it away. And there's you know, thousands of recipes out there online of what to do with your discard. I just don't generally do much with it. And then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero this out again, and I'm going to use my unbleached white bread flour and do 50 grams of that. And you don't have to be stupid accurate here. We're just making sourdough starter. So then I'm going to mix this together really well. And so, again, so right now I should be sitting around 150 grams. Well, we're going to come back, and because I know I have 2 more feedings to do, I can manipulate how much I do to make sure that I only have about 500 or 600 grams at the very end, 200 to 300 to put back away for long-term storage, and 300 for my recipe. Okay, so then this will go into just a mason jar. You can use anything you want. And then there's this cool little way that a lot of bakers will mark their jars. And they just use a rubber band. And so you can put that down on there. So it kind of gives you a visual of where you started, so you can see if your starter is going to be active. So what we'll do is we'll come back here in about 20 hours or so, and we'll check it out, see where we're at. We'll mix it again, and we'll just continue on the process. Okay, so here we are about 10 to 12 hours later, and if you can see that this has actually grown, what, 200% or more in 10 hours. So what we're going to do is we're just going to let this go for about another 10 hours or so, and then we are going to come back and feed it. Okay, so here we are, day 2, or evening of day 2. It's been about 20 to 24 hours since we first took our starter, Old Stinky, out of long-term storage. So now we're going to do our second feeding, okay? And it's pretty simple. This morning you saw where it had grown about 200 or 300%. It even continued to grow even more. It got up to here, and then it now has subsided back to where it was at. So Old Stinky, very active. So we're going to go ahead and mix this around. And again, I like to do this with using grams so I can get as accurate as I can. And all I'm going to do is just take this, and I'm just going to weigh it. Yeah, I've got about 100 grams. Now I'm going to rinse this bowl. So hang tight, I'll be right back. So now we've rinsed our jar out, and I like to rinse it out. I'm a little rough. I don't rinse it completely. You've noticed that it's still very cloudy, so it still has a lot of the remainder left in here. And we had 100 grams here. I'm just going to add 100 grams of water. That, I'm going to go ahead and mix this. I'm going to tear out our bowl. And if you notice, it wasn't absolutely perfect. Now rinse, tear that, and now I'm going to add 100 grams of flour. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mix this together, and I'm going to get it back into my jar. I'll move my rubber band up, and we'll go from there. Okay, so here we are. We are getting ready to do our third and final feeding prior to making our sourdough loaves, and after bringing our sourdough starter out of long-term storage. So last night we did a feeding, and overnight it grew and grew and grew, and it got up to about here. So that was really good. We had about the right size vessel. We definitely don't want to feed and put it back in here because it will literally blow over everywhere. So we're going to be using this bowl. And so this is where you have to really adjust your timing. So you want to feed this for the third and final feeding about 10 to 12 hours prior to making your loaves, because you want this to be really active, and about 10 to 12 hours it's going to be in an incredibly active state. So if you're not going to be making bread for 24 hours, I would wait to do this final feeding, okay? But my goal is to make bread tomorrow morning, and which will be about 10 to 12 hours from now. So we're gonna go ahead and do our final feeding. I need 300 grams for my loaves. And so I want to be at about 600 grams or so going into this. So I have plenty left over to go back into long-term storage. So right now we're gonna go ahead and take our measurement. And because I need 600 grams, I only need to go in here with about 200 grams. You can do about 250 if you want a little extra. So then I'm going to tear this out. I'm going to add my 200 grams of water. And now I'm going to add my 200 grams of flour. Okay. And we're just going to give this a nice good stir. And we are going to put this away. I'm going to obviously have to put this into a bigger vessel because this vessel was definitely not big enough, and by tomorrow this thing will have grown and spewed all over the place. So anyway, then I will cover this loosely with either a lid or whatever vessel I choose. I'll use, saran wrap with a hole in it, or then throw a towel over it, whatever you have. It doesn't really matter. We don't have to get too critical and too crazy about it. But anyway, there you go. There's our third and final feeding before we're going to make our loaves. And you can hang on to this. You can add to this with your third and final feeding to go back into cold storage. There's really no wrong way to do this. The goal is to have an active starter after you bring it out of cold long-term storage, where it's nice and active, so it goes in and does a really great job to make some wonderful bread. So anyway, there you go. That's how I do it. Not necessarily how everybody else is going to do it, but that's my way, and it seems to be working for me. So I get this question asked a lot, and I hope it helps. Good luck making some bread. Cheers.